I'm acutely aware that I'm the fifth speaker after lunch, which must be the most difficult job imaginable. But I want to take you back to 5 years and 11 days ago. On the day Malta made the news for entirely the wrong reasons. A journalist called Daphne Caruana was assassinated outside her house. Now, as a journalist, Daphne worked on a number of stories that interested her and interested her readers. She was interested in a lot of topics that were mentioned today. International money laundering, how Malta was used by criminal interests, enormous criminal interests, like, for example, the kleptocrats that run countries like Azerbaijan and Angola, but also criminal families here in Sicily and in the south of Italy, used Malta, its financial infrastructure, its gaming infrastructure, to clean their money so that they could spend it for their rich lifestyles. She was interested in trafficking that used Malta and its enormous space of interest in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea to enable, to allow, to participate and profit from the trafficking of people, the trafficking of drugs, of arms, and other illegal traffics. She was interested in corruption in the awarding of public contracts, particularly those boosted up by funds coming from the European Union. She was interested by corruption in the disposal of public land. Malta is a very small country, so land is very expensive and very valuable. And the corrupt transaction of passing public land to private hands is an opportunity for a lot of people to profit illegally. And then the illegal and illicit authorization of the change of use of land, even in private property, that allowed for what I call the sack of Malta, a reflection of the sack of Palermo several decades ago. And she was interested in how, for these activities to happen, you had to document the illicit relationships between people in politics, people in what looked like business, and the underworld, the people actually trafficking the people on their boats and the people actually threatening people to comply. We didn't have a word for that. But 2 days after his mother was killed in front of his eyes, Matthew Caruana, her son, wrote his first comment on Facebook. And in that comment he used this phrase, "Malta is a mafia state." Now, you would forgive a man who has seen his mother burn up in flames any hyperbole and perhaps dramatic exaggeration. And that's what many of us thought it was. Until we started having conversations very early on with people, like people from Libera, one of the first organizations that I noticed making a statement about what had happened in Malta was the Ragusa branch of Libera, but also of journalists, particularly Italian journalists who came to Malta to ask questions about what happened there. And they told people like me, you know, there's a word for what's happening here. This is mafia. So we spent the last 5 years trying to explain to the community in Malta that the mafia is a real thing, because that's the first thing you need to accept before you can deal with a problem. And we come across a number of obstacles. There's cultural skepticism. It comes from the fact that Malta has a very poor culture of commons, of the common good. I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, so this is not science. But I see it, I recognize it when I see it, and that is, there isn't a popular awareness and appreciation of wanting things for having a value which is not profit, which is not money in your pockets. We come across institutional hostility to the idea of saying the mafia exists. One reason is obvious. If the mafia has captured the institutions deny that fact as part of an act of mafia. But the second dimension of that is that even the innocent good guys and good girls that work in these institutions deny the fact that they miss seeing this big elephant, this big monster in the room. There is low academic and low journalistic awareness of the complexity of organized crime. Journalism is limited, and much of it is controlled by and owned by this mafia state. A lot of references were made this morning to quotes by Pope Francis. Pope Francis made a visit to Malta last year, and in a speech next to the President of Malta, he made a specific observation about how corruption erodes the soul of society and how people in public life have a moral duty to fight corruption. Well, that speech given in Italian was not translated and was censored by the public broadcaster, the national equivalent of RAI. And then there's the final problem. Crime pays. It has an economic benefit, not only for the criminals, but for the entire community, or at least people sometimes perceive it that way. People say, if for the prosperity of Malta, and Malta is a prosperous country with full employment, if the price to pay is that we need to allow people to launder money in the country, then let them do it. Let them do it and let us enjoy the benefits of that. You know, we speak here, and we were participating with Libera in a project about the social reuse of confiscated assets. How can you speak about the reuse of confiscated assets where a country that has had a law, because it's an EU member state, for many years about the confiscation of assets, does not confiscate assets? The man charged with being the mastermind for killing Daphne Caruana Galizia, still from prison in preventive custody, profits from the casinos that were documented to be used, perhaps to pay, certainly to launder the money for the assassins he hired, allegedly, to kill Daphne Caruana Galizia. He still profits from the power station for which he is alleged to have paid tangenti to ministers, which is the scandal for which Daphne Caruana Galizia was killed. Those assets have not been recovered yet. The state has not made a claim for them, let alone considered reallocating them for social use. The final nail in the coffin, the final problem of this, that Malta did not have a tradition of civil society activism in this space, in conserving legality, in conserving the protection of rights. And that is why, and in that space, we set up Repubblica. Inspired, in part, but very, very prominently so, by the example of Libera. We work to support independent journalism, because without truth, you cannot have justice. We have copied the model of Libera by declaring Daphne Caruana Galizia an innocent victim of the mafia. Recognizing her as such means preserving not only the memory of the woman, which is important, it means keeping alive the truth of her stories. That makes us an anti-corruption protest movement in the streets, because failing a proper dialogue with the institutions, we have to do it in the streets. It would be unimaginable in Malta to have us standing alongside judges and prosecutors, as you are here today, where institutions that have the job to promote legality consider civil society as its partner. We are seen as a hostile cancer which needs to be pushed away domestically, but our existence has meant that on an international level we have become interlocutors. When the UN comes to Malta, when the OSCE comes to Malta, when the Council of Europe and the European Commission comes to Malta, they no longer only find the government which tells them corruption. There is no corruption here. There are citizens who are committed to speak up in spite of the consequences. And we go to court to drag these institutions who fail to do their jobs. I won't go into the details, but I'll just mention one example. We went all the way to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg to force a change in Malta's constitution that secures the independence of the judiciary, that is no longer appointed by prime ministers and governments. Those judges are supposed to judge. We promote policies, but with great frustration. We have promoted with the inquiry that investigated Daphne Caruana Galizia's assassination, the adoption in Malta of a law based on your 416 bis from your Codice Penale, una legge antimafia. The government saw that in Parliament, and when faced with it, they laughed us off, and they said, you know who wants an anti-mafia law? People who want this country to get a reputation as a mafia country. You have set the example which we're trying to teach our country of that having anti-mafia laws is exactly how you start fighting and resisting the mafia phenomenon. But you need to change the culture, not just the laws. And you teach us to go to the schools. We had last week with us Maria Falcone, Giovanni Falcone's sister in Malta. She followed some great eminent speakers in our events, like your Luigi Ciotti, like Leo Luca Orlando, that came and supported our cause. And she told us, go to the schools. Well, we tried that. And the teachers who wrote to parents asking for their authorization to speak to their pupils, to their students, about the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia were named and targeted by the television station owned by the ruling party. This is enforced omerta from top. So the last two missions that Repubblica has then, should not be the role of civil society to be the one to denounce crimes and to prosecute them in courts. But when institution fails, somebody has to try. Fare denuncia is a core part of our mission. And the other core part of our mission is, hopeless as it sounds, the effort, consistent as it is, to wipe us away. Our mission is to give hope to people of goodwill who want their country to be a place of law and justice. Thank you.